Hello, I'm Dr. Scott Wadier.
And I'm Tommy Welling, and you're listening to the Fasting for Life podcast.
This podcast is about using fasting as a tool to regain your health, achieve ultimate wellness, and live the life you truly deserve.
Each episode is a short conversation on a single topic with immediate actionable steps. We cover everything from fat loss and health and wellness to the science of lifestyle design.
We started Fasting for Life because of how fasting has transformed our lives, and we hope to share the tools that we have learned along the way. Hey everyone, welcome to the Fasting for Life podcast. My name is Dr. Scott Wadier, and I'm here, as always, with my good friend and colleague, Tommy Welling. Good afternoon to you, sir.
Hey, Scott, how are you?
Fantastic, my friend. Excited for today's conversation. We are going to be stirring the pot a little today.
Uh-oh.
So things that I like to do for 500 Alex. I'm excited. We're going to be talking about the age-old calorie in, calorie out versus the carbohydrate insulin model of obesity. And if y'all are new to the Fasting for Life podcast, you're going, what the heck does that mean? Don't worry, we're going to unpack it for you. We're going to tap into the brain of one Dr. Benjamin Bickman, one of the world's foremost leaders on insulin and insulin resistance. So it is going to be a fun conversation today. We're going to break down the study, but most importantly, we're going to apply it to a real life situation. So if you're new, that's what we do. Welcome in. Thanks for giving us a shot. If you want to know more about Tommy or myself and our journey with fasting and how it's transformed our lives, made us better dads and better husbands and just healthier and reverse lab and just completely transformed our health journey, the path that we were on. Head back to episode 1, short and sweet and to the point, but it's going to share kind of where our heart is and why we do what we do and why we have a weekly episode and why we have our coaching and why we have our challenges and why we have our resources, etc. And if you're an outstanding OG, you've been part of the Fasting for Life fam, and you're coming back for another dose of the Fasting for Life podcast, we welcome you in and thank you so much for continuing to be on this fasting lifestyle journey with us. So Tommy, I want to give a shout out to a recent listener and a recent 5-star review. So this came in from, before we get into the nerd out session, on calories in versus insulin, calories in, calories out versus insulin. This came from CPAT07. Just want to take time and say thank you and have great discussions about many things. I've been fasting since 18, using it as a lifestyle tool, which is why I love this shout out, with some breaks due to pregnancy and nursing. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear consistent conversations in an area that I'm so passionate about. Agreed. Birds of a feather flock together.
Right.
She didn't put that, I said that. As a registered dietitian, this area of research is still not quite accepted by so many of my colleagues. Couldn't agree more. So it's nice to have a place where I can listen to like-minded individuals who've also discovered a better quality of life through the power of fasting. It never gets old, but sometimes I feel somewhat alone in this journey, and hearing your show will often reinforce my whys.
Wow. Of course. Yeah.
This thing is packed full of value, right? So
I love that.
If you want to read it, head to wherever you get your podcast, Apple Podcasts specifically. This is where that review was left. Feel free to leave your own 5-star review. Yes, that's a shameless plug, but that tells the podcast world that we are bringing value each and every week. So thankfully, we've been blessed with lots of 5-star reviews, which we feel, and we're biased, of course, but that also means that, like CPAT07 here, you're getting benefit out of it. So she feels stronger than ever, even at 40, but it took work and dedication. Yes, of course. So
love that.
She attributes much of it being a part of this community. If you want to join the community too, you can head to the Facebook, the show notes, click the Facebook link for the Fasting for Life community. And she just gives us some more accolades and thanks for what it is that we do. So I want to give it back to you, Kristen, MSRD. Thank you for taking the time to write that. Thank you for taking the time to share the why behind it. And that's ultimately what we want to do, is we want to create this community of like-minded fasters that use fasting, not just as a weight loss tool, but more importantly, as a health and a lifestyle adaptation that just is incredible. So thank you.
Stay in the driver's seat, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So Tommy,
Sure.
That was a long introduction, man. I didn't plan on doing that. So here's the study. Okay. Hypercaloric, low carbohydrate, high fat diet protects against the development of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease in obese mice. Yes. It's a brand new study. that just came out in March of 24 of this year. So we're recording this less than a month out from when it came out. In obese mice, in contrast to isocaloric Western diet. So let me set the stage, Tommy, and then I'll have you start taking it away.
Okay.
One of the issues that we've seen with a lot of, and even though if you've listened to the podcast, you go back and listen to the episodes that we break down research articles, are probably every 3 out of 4, right? Probably 60 to 70% of our episodes are that. And in all of the studies, especially with time-restricted feeding, time-restricted eating, we're seeing a lot more done in women right now, more frequently, a lot more intermittent fasting studies. There's tons of research on ADF. We've even seen some 1 meal a day studies. But a lot of the times, those studies are coming from a standard American diet, and they're typically always lower calorie or calorie deficit. So fasting or non-fasting groups, whenever they're compared. So everybody's eating less of everything. So we see insulin come down in both of those groups typically. But in some of those studies, we actually see all of the HOMA-IR, the insulin resistance, the triglycerides, the lab values change. The fat loss change so much more in the fasting groups or the decreased insulin groups, right? So like Dr. Ben Bikman said, his contention is, well, if we're truly going to study calories in, calories out versus the carbohydrate, sugar, insulin model of obesity, then we need to have a fat study. We need to make people fat, right? Well, there's not going to be a lot of people that sign up for that. At least I don't think.
Yeah.
But that's what they studied in this study. Is they made the mice fat. So we need a hypercaloric study, and that's what this is. It's a hypercaloric, low carb, high fat.
Yeah.
Because hypocaloric, low carb, because when you're in a hypocaloric state with low carb and insulin is low, then you cannot store fat. And that's what this study proves. So I would love, and we're going to talk about what we'd like to see coming out of this study, but we're going to be kind of at the altar of the calorie in, calorie out model as we unpack this with you today.
Well, when you think about what kind of environment you have in the body, if you have a low insulin environment, then that's really going to determine what happens more likely to more of the fuel that's coming in. And so high insulin versus low insulin, you have an important distinction there because physiologically, there are decisions to be made, and those decisions will be different based on the concentration of insulin that's floating around at that point. So not only did Dr. Bikman say what you just said, but what he also said was what we need to do is keep the calories above what the needs are of the individual
to see what happens.
Yeah, and then bring insulin down. And let's see what the results will be, because it's pretty easy to go, well, this person has been gaining weight, or they've been maintaining weight, and they have extra, they have fat they want to lose, and then let's change their diet and let's bring down their calories by maybe 500 calories a day, whatever the case may be. And we see this a lot with low carb versus low carb, high fat versus high carb, low fat, that kind of thing. We see those kind of studies. But the thing about it is, if you're kind of reversing course from fat storage mode, then even a reduction in calories like that without reducing carbohydrates is going to end up being a lower insulin environment than what that individual has been going through. So typically you'll see weight loss after that. Well, and usually those studies are a matter of 4 weeks or 6 weeks or maybe 8 weeks. And then a lot of times they'll show those results start to taper off. But at the same time, the point there being is that they're in a lower insulin environment than where they were before the study started. So this study is interesting because all throughout they continued to increase the number of calories that came into these mice. And then, but they did it in 2 different ways. One was the lower carbohydrate way, and one was kind of the standard Western diet way, which would be higher fat and higher sugar as well.
Right. So when we're overviewing this study, we're going to be talking about those 2 main groups. Now, they had a 10-week feeding period, right, where they needed to actually feed the mice to make them obese. They needed to induce that obesity, right? So they were split up into the 6 weeks of the Western diet and the 6 weeks of the low carb, high fat diet. And what we saw,
they induced the obesity with the Western diet.
Correct.
So half of the mice continued with that same type of diet, and then the other half they switched it.
Yes. You said that. I understood it. I didn't make it clear. So yes, absolutely. That's exactly what they did. So what they saw for results wise, then we'll talk about some of the nuance about, the contention to this model, the contention to, are you breaking the law of thermodynamics? Well, no, you're not. In the calorie in, calorie out model, here is in the continuation of the 6 weeks of the Western diet. And then you have a couple things we want to mention on the genetic side too, which was really fascinating. The increased weight gain, glucose intolerance, hyperinsulinemia, so elevated insulin, and hepatomegaly. So we're going towards the non-alcoholic fatty liver disease category, right?
Yeah, enlarging that liver. Yeah.
And an increase in a specific FASN gene, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. When after the 10 weeks of the Western diet, which is the high carb, high fat, high sugar, right? And they also saw steatosis and ballooning of the liver as well in the continuation of the Western diet. And then the opposite group, which was the 6 weeks of low carb, high fat, the weight gain stopped, right? Normal glucose regulation, normal insulin levels measured by HOMA-IR, which is the gold standard, normal liver weight and a healthy liver function, as well as a decrease in that, a normal expression of the FASN gene.
Yeah.
And you mentioned something, Tommy, in one of the graphs that even though the weight didn't in this 6 weeks, they didn't lose weight, the trend was moving in that direction.
Yeah, it was. So if you look at the directionality of the weight trajectory, then whenever they split off into those two different groups after the overfeeding period, then you had kind of a plateau, like a stoppage of the weight gain for the lower carb, higher fat group. And then, but it started to turn downward. And so it would be interesting as one of the recommendations, and they're probably already working on this, which would be like an extended results group. So if it had continued to 20 weeks or 24 weeks, what would that have shown? Would it have shown some further weight reduction and fat reduction? It may have, and so it's just interesting because you have this this chasm, this separation between those two groups as far as their weight goes. So you have a flattening and then a potential reversing that starts to occur too. So it'll be interesting to see what happens after that.
Before we get into some of the nitty gritty like levels and the gene expression, I want to make sure where we're coming from with talking about this study and the application to a fasting lifestyle. One of the things we get often is, and we've talked about this, we've done episodes on this, where the low carb groups in the diabetes studies don't show sustainability they show sustainability at 6 months, 12 months, starts to wane at 18 months. And then by 2 years, they're back to A1C levels and blood sugar levels and weight levels and fat mass levels that were greater than when they started.
And compliance levels that have completely tapered off.
I'm never going to eat a roll or a carbohydrate again. That's not what we're here for, right?
Yeah.
Low carb is a great and incredible, powerful tool in a fat loss phase to reverse metabolic conditions, as well as now proven by this study. I know. It's in mice. I get it.
Right.
But we see it. We got to start somewhere, right? Tommy, you explained that eloquently.
You have to. Like we start with animals. If the results are intriguing, interesting, and seem to be uncovering something, then we progress kind of up the ladder and go towards humans. We wouldn't start with humans. So this is we're cracking open something that's we're starting to ask the right questions and then design the studies in the right way. So let's take this up the ladder, up the food chain, if you will.
Right. So apply this to that thought process. Okay, is low carb a long-term sustainable approach? Well, there's some research out there that shows that it's not. Right. However, just in 6 weeks of low carb, high fat, if you've been gaining weight, it's an absolute game changer if you're going to combine low carb and fasting, because now you're going to decrease insulin, right? Which is one of the threads of this conversation, insulin versus calories. Which one's more important? Well, they're both important, right? But you're going to decrease insulin, and you're going to see, if you start fasting, you're automatically going to be putting yourself into a time-restricted feeding protocol, which is going to limit your caloric intake.
Mm-hmm. Then you get the best of both levers right there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So when we look at a couple of things in regards to insulin resistance, the Western diet showed increased. So this is the 10 weeks to get both groups to a standard level, and then they split, right? But the Western diet showed increased insulin levels and higher insulin resistance, right? And that's going to indicate the diet, that lifestyle may contribute to the body's difficulty in using insulin effectively. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Right? The low carb, boom, insulin levels did not develop insulin resistance, and it kept insulin in check. So this highlights that despite similar that's a word I say often, calorie intake, the type of diet significantly impacts the resistance, with the high sugar, high carb, the Western diet being more likely to worsen the sensitivity compared to lower diets, lower in carbs, like studied in the study. It makes perfect sense, right?
Yeah, as carbohydrates are low and fat is higher, then you don't need as much insulin floating around. You're not getting the signals that push the insulin from the pancreas. Like there's no need for so much of it, and then thus the layers of insulin resistance don't develop because they're not just bathing in excess insulin all the time.
The whole point too is this approach specifically was used to isolate the effects of the macronutrients. Has anyone ever counted calories and tracked macros and it hasn't worked? Insert insulin resistance.
Right.
Insert hormone imbalance. Insert HPA axis, adrenal dysfunction, and stress and sleep and all the stuff.
Yes, especially if you're using an approach like I've done many times in the past, which was like, if it fits your macros. You remember that? That was a big saying, right? But if it fits your macros has nothing to do with meal timing. So those macros and your total caloric intake and the ratios of your macronutrients all matter. They all come into play. But if there's no time restriction of that, then basically every time you bring in some more macros, you're usually bringing in a higher need for insulin each time, which is actually accumulating throughout the day too, especially if you're spiking those insulin hits like 3, 4, 5 times a day. Like there were a few times where I did 5 and 6 meals throughout the day in order to try to optimize my metabolism, stoke the fire, if you will.
Yeah. So this is one of the things that I love. One of the practical implications of this paper is it highlights the detrimental effects of high sugar carb intake in high calorie diets and suggests reevaluating nutritional management for better obesity control. Now, they use the word control. I'm going to go forward and say fasting plus going lower carb. Now, you don't have to go keto. You can eat some carbohydrates and live your life, right? And not feel like you're missing out on everything, right? We're not dogmatic in that. We want your lifestyle to be your lifestyle and apply fasting in a way that gets you life-giving results, right?
Yeah.
And the future from here would be to explore the impact of low-carb, high-fat diets on visceral adiposity and total energy expenditure and the metabolic adaptations and all that, right? But right from the get-go, we see clearly that way of eating results in obesity. Now, if you want to control it, then fine, go low carb. But if you really want to reverse it, combine fasting and low carb, and boom, now you're on the path.
Yeah, we talk about strategic cycles of things like low carb.
That's what we do in the challenges, the fast cycling. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, when we put together fast cycling with things like keto cycling or with just a better balanced approach cycling, if you will. So we're not
a normal plate. Not the food pyramid or the my plate recommendations.
Yeah. Because the problem that can happen is when low carb starts to work, but then the fear can build like, man, I really feel like I'm missing out on a lot. Could I really do this long term? And then if that turns into I'm stepping away from the compliance of that low carb, then it can really the weight can come back on fairly quickly. But if we think about it in more of a strategic compartmentalized approach, like, okay, I'm going to do this for 30 days, or I'm going to do 6 weeks or 12 weeks of this, of keto, which is what we've seen in the literature with good compliance. And we've talked
Yeah.
about that in the past. That can be a really great way to stoke the fire of the fat burning process without kind of burning yourself out on the long term.
And I just love that this study challenges the traditional belief, right, that caloric intake is the primary driver of obesity and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. And we've talked about NAFLD. I mean, I was on that path. If you're new
me
and you hear
too.
my story, like my enzymes are elevated, we'll just watch it.
Yeah.
When I was counting calories, tracking macros, weighing all my food, working out 5 days a week, right? Now I had an unbalanced food relationship, right? I had overconsumption, wrong foods, restaurant lifestyle, poor sleep. I had some things there that got me into that position. Lots of steroid, and not the anabolic steroids, but steroids for my asthma growing up that caused the resistance to set in, right? So I love that. It's looking at that macronutrients will drive that significant role in the disease development, and put a highlight on timing and composition rather than just quality versus quantity. Excuse me.
Yeah, well,
That's what I was trying to get to there as I stumbled through it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that's really a lot of people can identify with that, where you start looking at your blood work and you start noticing those things, the ALTs, the ALP, AST, GGT, and
Right.
like, oh, what's that?
God
Doc?
bless you.
Yeah.
There's a lot of letters.
What's that, doc? Like it's starting to tick up, those kind of things. And they're like, oh, well, we'll keep an eye on it. And a lot of times those are correlated with obesogenic diets and accumulation of weight. Like we can see in this study, and we've seen it
Elevated triglycerides,
Yeah.
elevated cholesterol, elevated blood pressure, metabolic syndrome. Absolutely. We're going to go there with the FASN gene here in just a second. So this is a perfect transition.
Yeah, and I mean, because those things all kick up as you start to overfill the liver, and as it starts to stay like that, then it starts pushing out more enzymes to try to kind of get a hold of like an overly rich environment, an over fatty accumulation, which it's actually because you have carbohydrate metabolism that has to, like certain carbs, fructose, for example, has to go through the liver, and then which we end up seeing this increase in these enzymes, and then ultimately the deposition of visceral fat, which is very, very problematic. But this is all a related cascade here, which is why the results of this study are just so important to all of us.
And so I want to touch on the triglycerides thing at one point as well, because triglycerides is one of those things. And, LDL, if that's being used by your medical provider, this is not medical advice. So consult with your primary. That's my disclaimer, right? And just put it out there. But if they're looking at LDL as a driver to put you on a statin, there's more to the story. So then LDL got moved to, all the VLDLs and the LLDLs and then the ratios, and now it's APOB, and it just keeps moving. The needle just keeps moving, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, do we know that that's a true driver? What we do know are things like CAC score over the age of 50, huge indicator of the development of heart disease. But the incredible thing here is when we look at what the obesogenic Western diet induced in terms of hyperinsulinemia, high insulin, and the increase in de novo lipogenesis, right? So I want you to talk about, Tommy, the FASN gene and what it did in both cases and why that matters to a fasting, low carb lifestyle.
Well, let's bring it back to Dr. Fung for a second here, because all throughout the obesity code, he talked about let's take a look at what actually happens. Let's take a look at cause and effect rather than just a correlation, right? So some of the correlations in the lower carb and the diet manipulation studies that happen that we're looking at for guidance for losing weight and burning through excess fat stores, the correlations aren't necessarily helpful. So when you're looking for cause and effect, he goes into it very eloquently in the book about how you can inject insulin and make the patient or the subject gain weight. It's a very easy causation, right? Not just a correlation. But when we're talking about looking at the whole system and what's happening when we manipulate diets and see what happens on the scale, it gets very much more like correlational. Okay. So when we go to what is a high insulin environment and what does it actually do, this study is basically an extension of the logic in the obesity code, which is one thing that I love. And what happens in the FASN gene is it's fatty acid synthase. So it's required for the deposition of fat. So in order to store fat, you need fatty acid synthase. You actually need a few other enzymes as well, but it's one of the big players. And what they showed really well in this study is that all it took was insulin to kick up the production. You had a 4 times production of fatty acid synthase in the high insulin environment. All you needed to do was increase insulin, you got more fatty acid synthase. When you have more fatty acid synthase, you go into fat storage mode, period. And as soon as they differentiated the diets of the two groups, then that expression came right back to normal levels, which was the same as the control group on the standard diet, not the Western diet, not the obesogenic diet, but the standard diet. And basically, insulin actually causes the increased transcription. There's a regulatory protein involved, and it upregulates the genes involved in fatty acid synthesis and triglyceride synthesis as well. So you have multiple problems here coming directly from insulin, and so this is causal here.
And I love when we look at some of the differences between the groups too. You know, the Western diet increased basal glucose levels. The low carb, high fat shows a delayed response in blood glucose, right? The area under the curve for glucose. Now, if you want to learn more about area under the curve and CGMs and tracking and all that, we did an episode on it. Just search it. It'll come up.
Yeah.
But it's significantly higher. For them to say significant, like even though it's statistically significant, they're adding the significance here in the Western diet versus the standard and the low carb, high fat. Fasting insulin is much higher in the Western diet. HOMA-IR is higher, indicating increased insulin. I can't speak. Total cholesterol is higher in the Western diet. HDL is lower in the Western diet. And the LDL, interestingly enough, actually stayed the same. So I love the fact that we have some levers here, Tommy, that we can take and apply now in real time with our food decisions, with our meal timing, that using this lower carb approach, we now know that if you've been gaining or if you've been lacking consistency in your fasting efforts, you're going to be able to combine and shut off the increased gene expression or transcription. Used a bunch of fancy words there earlier, but that increased firing of the loaded gun, right? That increased production or expression of the FASN gene, which increases the de novo lipogenesis, the fat storage and fat production. Just by pulling those two levers, you're going to shut that down. You can stop the gain. You can get off the regain train, but you need consistency in both of these areas. And I'm excited to see where they take this from here.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, what the next studies they're going to be doing and where this is going to go, as this just came out, you know, less than a month ago.
Yeah, I have a feeling that they'll be tracking the results maybe for an extended period of time. I'm hoping to see an update to this study that kind of that continued on with those same groups. That would be nice, and then maybe elevating to some larger animal models. And you know, I'd love to see this done in a human study. I think ethically speaking, there wasn't anything that would be all that questionable. So I think they could potentially do that. There may be some retrospective parts of that study, though. It may be for recent fat gainers, recent weight gainers, you know, to put them in to kind of control that, but look back rather than forcing people to gain weight. I don't think they'll have to look very far to find some folks that would say, I recently gained some weight, and I'd like to
Yeah.
see if I can take some off, right?
Yeah. If we look at the stats, that's pretty prevalent, right? People can lose it, but they
For
can't keep
sure.
it off. So obviously they're regaining it, right?
Yeah, but going low carb, not a big stretch of the imagination or anything like that. So I think it's ripe for further investigation. That's for sure.
And some practical applications. If you're looking for some fasting schedules, right? Some fast cycling, you can grab the blueprint in the show notes, the blueprint to fasting for fat loss. It's 20 pages. It's a free resource. It's got a bunch of info in there. It talks about macros and splits and how to build your plate. And we talk about prioritizing protein and healthy fats and fiber and then switching out your higher hedonic foods, which are the higher fat, higher sugar, higher carb foods like pizzas and restaurant burgers and loaded with cheese and bacon and eggs and all that stuff, right?
Yeah, the fats and the sugars as well.
Correct.
And it might not say sugar on the label, but at the same time, a lot of those processed carbohydrates are going to be broken down so quickly that they may as well be just labeled sugar. And so
Yeah.
that's the problem. That's the exact diet that they used here for the study in the obesogenic diet, right? High
Right.
fat, high sugar.
Right. So we want, and that's all around us, right? We could call it the SAD diet. I'm sure you've heard that acronym now. But if you're going to be making
Sure.
some tangible changes, swap some stuff, right?
Mhm.
Instead of, having your plate be, a big, cut your carb serving in half.
Mhm.
Don't omit it completely. Just cut it in half. Find those areas. With fasting, it's interesting because we had this conversation the other day. I don't remember if it was inside of coaching or on a podcast record or just us talking about fasting because that's what we do.
Right.
But we were talking about this idea of when we're creating our plates that protein doesn't happen by accident, right?
Yep,
So
true.
when you're high fat, high sugar, protein, especially in the protein's non-existent. That's why I don't even really like keto for long term because I want to prioritize protein more, especially as we age,
Yes.
especially for women, perimenopause into menopause. Like you need more protein because the protein's effectiveness that you eat it decreases as you age because of progesterone decrease, right? So we need more of it, right? So if you want some guidance on that, grab the blueprint. But if you're making some tangible switches, find some swaps, find less refined, less processed stuff, right? And stay consistent with your fasting. Combining these two, you're going to see nothing but wins, Tommy. So as we wrap up today, let's put some final thoughts, put a bow on it. And then if you guys, looking for more guidance, head to the show notes, click the links, grab the link, grab the Facebook community, head in there. It's a well-oiled, warm, welcomed machine of fasting. That's all we do. And we don't play around with people that don't want to be there. So we protect the environment that we've created so we can talk about fasting 24/7, just like CPAT 07 said. Right. I want to go somewhere where I know people are on the same page, right?
Yes. Yeah. So, I think taking away an action step or two here would be to think about it like your next long fast is not the holy grail. And it's not that your results are hinged on like a really long fast. And so I think what's beautiful about this study is that it's showing the impact of diet and a deliberate dietary change, but also the physiology that's behind what happens on the scale. And then of course, like if this was me and my biomarkers were changing in these ways to the negative and then reversing back, like I know the difference that feels like energetically wise, just walking around, quality of sleep, quality of life wise. So my point here is that your food choices matter a lot. And that's a big lever. It's not just all about the fasting, and it's definitely not just about your longest fast, right? But that can be that can kind of be the shiny object sometimes when you come to fasting. Like weight loss is kind of the shiny object, but then your longest fast can kind of be the shiny object. So make sure you're taking full advantage of your food choices lever and start thinking about it in a compartmentalized way where you don't necessarily have to make certain dietary changes forever to gain control over the scale and over your health and quality of life like you really want.
Because the reality is, in the beginning with fasting, you can, we all ended up in a situation with lifestyle choices, food decisions, stress, sleep, all of that stuff that ended up us having some form of weight loss resistance and insulin issues, right? Blood sugar related issues or weight loss resistant
it's
issues,
all on a
right?
scale, all on a sliding scale.
Yeah. So the reality is, though, when you start fasting, fasting can really hack that, right? And your food decisions and your lifestyle and your habits need to catch up and change too.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. There is no magic weight loss pill. I wish there was, right? Well, don't even get me started on the Ozempics of the world. But anyway,
you can outfast a bad diet is what I just heard there.
In the beginning.
In the beginning, yeah. And I did.
Correct.
Yeah.
And that's why I love the application to real life of this study. So, all right, Tommy, we nerded out a little bit. Put some cool action steps in there. Appreciate y'all listening in. Appreciate the 5-star reviews. Head to the show notes. Grab the resource that's right for you. Tommy, as always, I appreciate the conversation, sir, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you. Bye. So, you've heard today's episode, and you may be wondering, where do I start? Head on over to thefastingforlife.com and sign up for our newsletter, where you'll receive fasting tips and strategies to maximize results and fit fasting into your day-to-day life.
While you're there, download your free Fast Start guide to get started today. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Make sure to leave us a 5-star review, and we'll be back next week with another episode of Fasting for Life.